I thought I would get into New Year's resolutions because they are well underway, right? Fitness clubs are brimming with new members, at least for now, and Weight Watchers is full, so to speak. People are trying to see their New Year's resolutions through. I spend way too much time on the internet combing for bizarre things to open up sermons with. Here are some actual resolutions I found on the internet. This year, my New Year's resolution is to start washing my hands after I use the restroom. You can't make this stuff up. I hope this one is joking. This year, my New Year's resolution is to only get divorced once. This year, my New Year's resolution is to spend less than $1,825 on coffee at Starbucks. I probably should pay attention to that one. This year, my New Year's resolution is to watch more cute and cuddly kitten videos on YouTube. This year, my New Year's resolution is to watch less TV in standard definition. This year, my New Year's resolution is to stop waiting around like a loser all week long for the next episode of Downton Abbey to air and instead binge watch when it all comes out at the end of the season on Netflix. This year, stop buying worthless junk on eBay because QVC has better deals. This year, stop texting on my cell phone while eating McDonald's, speeding through crosswalks with a frost-covered windshield. This year, my New Year's resolution is to buy new clothes big enough to account for next year's holidays. New Year's resolution to start smoking to lose weight. And last but not least, my New Year's resolution is to find a more accurate scale. Now, those are obviously silly ones, but here are some true ones. This is actually the top 10 list of all New Year's resolutions, and you can already guess what they are, right? The New Year's resolution to lose weight, volunteer to help others, quit smoking, go back to school, get a better job, save money, get fit, eat healthy food, manage stress, manage debt, take a trip, reduce, reuse, recycle, and last but not least, to stop using or drinking so much alcohol. Now, these are all worthy. The top 10 ones are certainly worthy, and we should pursue them. But what's always interesting to me is the one that's conspicuously absent. What do we say to people, obviously, at the beginning of the year? Happy New Year. Have a happy New Year. I have never once heard somebody's New Year's resolution, this year I'm going to be happy. It's never on the list. Most of us don't even think about this is even a possible candidate for a New Year's resolution. The question I have is why? It's so obvious, it's staring us down, and yet we don't think to do that. There are many reasons, one of which is we don't think of it as a product. We think of it as a byproduct. If you do these other things that I just mentioned, more likely than not, you'll be happy or happier, and I think that's true. But I also think there's something to be said about the pursuit of happiness, not my idea, obviously, and a worthy pursuit and a worthy goal. I also think it's because we don't think of happiness as a moral issue, as a way to better ourselves or better our families or better our communities or better the world around us. We usually don't think of happiness as a moral, ethical stance. But the truth is, I think it is. And this week's Torah portion, we see the end game of Pharaoh. This is the final Torah portion where he just can't give up, right? He's in the final stage of trying to destroy ultimately the Israelites. And that anger, that destruction, that obsession is ultimately what brings him down. It's what brought down Hitler. It's why ultimately he lost the war. He was more obsessed with exterminating the Jews than actually winning the war. Why? Because Ra in Hebrew, right? Evil. That's what evil does. Evil exists for one reason, to destroy. That's what the Hebrew word Ra means, destruction. Evil is a cancer, right? Cancer, what is a cancer? Cancer is a disease that destroys the host organism. Ultimately, cancer destroys itself, but it doesn't care because that's what cancer does, and that's what evil does. There's a famous teaching, I'm sure you've heard of it, but whenever I think of evil, I think of this teaching. One day, a scorpion stood on the side of a stream and asked a frog to carry it across the stream. The frog, however, was a little bit paranoid because scorpions were known to sting frogs. So the frog says to the scorpion, "How do I know that you won't sting me?" The scorpion says, "Now, if I sting you and we're halfway across the river, that doesn't make any sense. We'll both drown." The frog thought about it, thought it made sense, so he decided to give the scorpion a ride. Halfway across the river, what of course does the scorpion do? He stings the frog. And as they're about to go under, the frog says to the scorpion, "How could you do this? Why would you do this? Now we're both going to drown." To which the frog said, "It's because that's my nature. It's what I do. It's who I am," right? And that's usually how we think of evil. That's what evil is. That's what evil does. Evil exists and always has and always will. And that's what we mean, I think, when we read the warning that God says even before Pharaoh hardens his heart. V'yechazek Adonai et lev Paro, melech Mitzrayim. And God says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Right? It seems like Pharaoh doesn't have a choice. It seems like evil is predetermined, it's predestined, and there's nothing that Pharaoh can do. But the problem with defining the evil as the scorpion, or defining Pharaoh as having no free will, is just that. He has no free will. As Jews, we don't believe this. We don't believe that Pharaoh was without free will. We don't believe that evil comes into this world through naturally and organically. It's something that is learned, it is developed, it is acquired. As Jews, we don't believe in original sin, that people are born evil, and we don't believe that they're born good. We believe people are blank slates and they become what they write upon themselves through the way they live. Now, it's not to say that people aren't predisposed towards certain things, towards alcohol, towards destruction, destructive behavior, even evil. Of course they are. Some of us are more likely to tend that way, towards that way. However, right, as Jews, we don't believe that any baby ever has been evil. They're innocent. They're all innocent. And if that's the case, even Hitler was an infant at one point. Even Pharaoh was somebody's baby. And at some point, they lost their moral compass. They lost their way. We don't know at what point, but we do know why. The rabbis say we lose our way, not in a moment. I don't know, but I don't think there are that many totalitarian dictators in history that just woke up one day and said, I'm going to be a totalitarian dictator and annihilate my people. The rabbis say it happens, avera goreret avera, slowly and subtly over time, right? One sin leads to another sin, and they get bigger and they get stronger and they grow in power, and ultimately at the end of the day, you have evil. The Jews are obsessed with understanding what evil is, how it operates, and eradicating it from the world. That's our mission in a nutshell. Tikkun Olam is to eradicate evil and darkness and suffering and fix the world through goodness and through light and through life. So what are some of the ingredients of evil? And this is an important conversation. I think we learn a lot from Pharaoh. One of the key ingredients to evil is unhappiness, right? Dennis Prager, a teacher of mine who's deeply influenced me, at least in the Judaic realm, not so much the politics, but certainly Judaism, talks about, in his book, he has a book called Happiness is a Serious Problem. And he says the following, and then we'll go back to Pharaoh. He says, when you think about a suicide bomber, what are some adjectives that come to mind? Fun, grateful, happy. Gee, it's hard to believe, he says, this suicide bomber strapped on a bomb belt and blew himself up. He was always so gosh darn happy. When you think about Nazis or communists or Klansmen or child molesters, do you immediately think, now there are some happy people? He says totalitarian dictators, despots, gangsters, terrorists. What are the words we use to define them? Loner, fanatic, sociopath, angry, mean, happy? It only takes a moment, he says, to realize that while most unhappy people do not engage in evil, most evil is done in this world by unhappy people. We don't know much about Pharaoh's origins, but we do know that he was an unhappy person. How do we know that? Because it says, what does it use, the word used to describe his heart? Many words, one of which is kasheh, which means he had a hardened heart, but the other one is kaved. Right? Kaved means dense. It means impenetrable. It means ultimately unhappy. Rabbi Baruch Benjamin HaKohen Melman, I thought my name was difficult, says that this is how Pharaoh began to lose his way. It began in a place of unhappiness, and unhappiness morphed into misery, into destruction, and one day he woke up and we woke up and it was evil. as Dennis Prager says, the happy people in this world make the world a better place, and the unhappy people make it an unhappy place. And if you think about in your life or in the lives of the people around you, think about unhappiness. Anybody here who had an unhappy parent growing up or grandparent knows that the havoc, the destruction, not evil, but the destruction that can be brought upon a home. I grew up in such a home. My father was not happy. He struggled with depression. My grandmother was not happy. She struggled with depression, and it cast a dark shadow over my life and the lives of the people that they loved. They didn't mean to do it, but unhappiness knows no bounds, and ultimately it destroys those around them. If you've ever had an unhappy coworker or colleague, boss, you know just how miserable, how much misery comes from being around unhappy people. But Rabbi, I was born this way, right? Maybe I was born this way. That can be our excuse. There truly are people who are unhappy. However, that's no excuse. As Prager points out in his book, you can't plea that argument over anything. Right? I was born stingy, therefore I'm not going to give tzedakah. As Jews, we don't care what you're feeling about giving tzedakah. I'm not feeling in the mood to give tzedakah. I'm not feeling charitable. Who cares about your feelings? Ultimately, you have to give charity, regardless of your feelings. What if we said this about, as Dennis Prager says, body odor? You know what? My natural scent is this. You need to deal with it. It's not my problem that you don't like the way I smell. I am not going to therefore use deodorant or take showers. Of course that's absurd. We wouldn't inflict that upon the world around us, and we wouldn't expect them to accept it. Why should unhappiness be any different? It doesn't mean that we can necessarily change the way we feel, but in Judaism, we're not measured by our feelings. We're measured by our actions. And so ultimately, we need to act happy even if we're not. Or in the words of the great Rebbe Nachman, one of the great mystics of Jewish history, lived in the 1800s, great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Jewish mysticism. He says, very simply, even if you don't feel happy, fake it. Pretend to be happy. And this was coming from a man who was known to be depressed, maybe bipolar, lived his life struggling with his darkness, and yet what did he say? True joy is the hardest thing to find, but you must force yourself to be happy all the time. This was a man who knew unhappiness, who battled unhappiness, and who spent his life striving to, at the very least, act happy, if not feeling happy. Why? Because ultimately he understood that it isn't just a nice thing to do. It isn't just a New Year's resolution, that happiness is a moral obligation. It's as important as courage and honesty and virtue and the other qualities that we call moral virtues. It's as important as each and every one of those, and we need to start thinking about happiness and the way that we act and the happiness or the unhappiness that we inflict on people all around us all the time. We may not feel happy, and that's okay. We need to deal with that, and that's another conversation for another time, but we always have the ability to choose how we act, and we can at the very least act happy even if we don't feel it. And so this should be a year where we live out this resolution that we all should take upon ourselves, right? To have truly a happy new year, and to do that through acting happy, moving towards happiness, holding this as a goal and a worthy New Year's resolution. The words of Rabbi Nachman, I'll end with this. Mitzvah gedola liot besimcha tamid. It is a great mitzvah. It is a mitzvah. In addition to keeping kosher and observing Shabbat and davening and tzedakah, it is a mitzvah unto itself to be happy, at the very least to act happy and bring happiness to sometimes an unhappy world.